All right, class. Today we're going to look at lesson 3 in chapter 6, dealing with rational coefficients, in this case, fractions. We're actually going to break up this lesson into two parts, fractions and decimals. So today we'll take care of fractions, and then the next lesson will be about decimals. Now remember, rational coefficients. Remember, coefficients are the numbers in front of the variables, and if a number is rational, it means it can be written as a fraction. So we talked a little bit about that either last chapter or the chapter before, about things that are rational. You can write as a fraction, so like regular whole numbers or decimals, essentially, and regular fractions. So we're going to look at those in terms of what they look like with these equations and how we solve them. These are still just one-step equations, so you only need one step in order to solve them. So let's go ahead and start here with letter A. Let's say you had a problem like this: 3/4 x is equal to 9. Okay, so what we learned from our last lesson about multiplying is that's what's happening to this, right? This is this part right here. I'll highlight briefly here. This is 3/4 times x. Okay, 3/4 times x. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to divide by 3/4, right? That's what we did on other problems. So kind of going back to yesterday's lesson, right? If it was just like this, 3x equals 9, we'd say, okay, well, that's 3 times x. So we would divide by 3 on both sides. And that's what we would do, right? So similarly, we would want to divide by 3/4 on both sides. Now, this is where we get into something we've done before, which is, remember, we don't really divide by fractions. Instead, we want to multiply by the reciprocal. So remember, divide by fraction is actually multiply by the reciprocal. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to divide by 3/4. We're actually going to multiply by 3/4. So let's look, or by not by 4/3, the reciprocal. So let's look at that and let's see what's going to happen here. So instead of dividing by 3/4, this is what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is 4/3. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Now, you'll notice that you did it right because things will cancel out. Remember, the goal is to isolate the variable. You want the variable by itself, all alone. So instead of, so what's going to happen is if you see over on this left side, remember, let's make our wall here. We got our left side here. The 4 will cancel with the 4. The 3 will cancel with the 3. And all we're left with is x. Now on the right side, let's make this a fraction, 9/1, right? By making that a fraction, now we're dealing fractions with fractions. And now we can do some cross-canceling here. We could say, okay, well, 3 becomes a 1, 9 becomes a 3, and 4 stays. So we end up with 3 times 4, which is equal to a positive 12. And again, remember, we want to check our answers to see if we got that right. So let's go ahead and do our check right here. All right, so I have 3/4 times x is equal to 9, which is 3/4 times, we said our answer is 12. So I'm going to put 12 in here instead, or 12/1. That should equal 9. Let's see if it does. Right now we know we can do some canceling. We could say, okay, well, that becomes a 1 and that becomes a 3. 3 times 3 is equal to 9. So our answer checks out. I can say that our answer is x/12. Okay, so I know I went over that a little bit quickly. There's a lot of canceling out, a lot of crossing things that going on. So let's go ahead and let's do another one. And we'll slow it down just a little bit and make sure we get it right here. All right, so letter B. 7/9 D is equal to -14. All right, so again, we want to first draw our wall here. So we know there's a left side. We want to locate the variable. The variable is the letter D in this case. So it's over on the left side, right? It's right here, letter D. So that's what we're going to try and isolate, try to get by itself. So again, the way I like to think about it sometimes is variables are lonely and they like to be by themselves. So they need to get rid of whatever is next to them. In this case, what is bothering that D? The 7/9. So how do we get rid of the 7/9? We're going to, again, multiply by reciprocal. Okay, so here we go. Let's multiply by the reciprocal. Reciprocal of 7/9 is 9/7. I'm going to do that on the other side as well. What you do on one side, you must always do to the other. Okay, I'm going to make this a 14/1. Negative 14. Okay, watch out for the negative. That's going to be a really tricky part for all of us is always what do we do with those negatives. So make sure we get those negatives canceled out correctly. Okay, so let's go ahead and cancel where we can. 9s will cancel. 7s will cancel. And that's how you know you did it right. You should have the same number on the top and bottom so they cancel really easy. And I left with just the letter D. All right, now let's see what cancels here. Now here's the part that gets a little tricky. This becomes a 1. And this becomes a 2. Now remember, that's a negative 2. A lot of times people forget the negative. So what I would do is I would just put that negative out there since I know it's there. And then 2 times 9 gives me 18. So D should equal negative 18. Again, let's plug it in. Let's do our check work to see. 7/9 times, and let's put in our answer, which is negative 18. This should equal negative 14. Let's see if it does. 9 cancels, that becomes a 1. That becomes a 2. It's still negative there. Negative 2 times, or 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. So my answer checks out. I can put a box around it. I'm confident that that is it. Okay, let's go ahead and try another problem. Again, just with a little practice, you start getting the hang of it. Let's do one where the variable's on the other side, right? Let's say this. How about 12 is equal to 2/3. We'll make that a negative 2/3 y. Okay, negative 2/3 y. Okay, so again, this time the variable is over on the other side. Let's do our wall. So again, we're not going to do anything with the 12. This time we're going to do, again, we do all the work with whatever's over on the side of the variable, right? Not on the left side, not on the right side, wherever the variable is. Okay, so what I'm going to multiply by here, and it's going to look a little funny here, but I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to multiply this by, remember the reciprocal, negative 3/2. And if you want to use the dot instead so you don't get confused with an x, that's fine. Now, it's very important that you keep the negative because the negatives have to cancel out too. We don't want a negative y, we want just regular y. So I'm going to multiply by negative 3/2 on this side as well. And again, I'll make that a 12/1. Okay, so now we go ahead and we cancel where we can. Again, we know that on the right side, everything should cancel. The 2's on top, the 2's on bottom. The 3's on top, 3's on bottom. 3's on bottom, 3's on top. Negative and negative. So all that I should be left with is the letter y. Right? So if you want to know what you're supposed to multiply with, it's the exact numbers that are there. Just you flip them over, including make sure you have the negatives. Now on the flip side, look over here. You should see, okay, well, there's one negative. My final answer should be negative. I know that for sure. Now let's go ahead and cancel. This is going to become a, do that in blue here. Let's see. That's going to become a 1. That's going to become a 6. Negative 3 times positive 6 is negative 18. Let's check that really quick. Original problem said 12 is equal to negative 2/3 times negative 18. Negative and negative make positive, so that's a good start. 3 cancels, then becomes a 1, that becomes a 6. So I'm left with negative 2, sorry, negative 2 times negative 6, which is positive 12. Checks out. All right. So I know it's a little bit hard to see with the original problem, but again, all you're doing is multiplying by the reciprocal. Let's say you had a problem that looks like this. Let's say we had 2 1/2 W is equal to 5/6. 2 1/2 W is equal to 5/6. All right, so what are you going to do here? Well, this 2 1/2 over on the left side isn't something we like to deal with. We don't like these mixed numbers. So what I'm going to do is the first step is I'm going to change to improper. I'm going to change 2 1/2 into an improper fraction. So instead of 2 1/2, this becomes 5/2. So now I got 5/2 Y or W is equal to 5/6. Now I know what to do. Now I just do the exact same thing that I did on these last couple problems, which is now I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So let's go ahead and multiply the reciprocal. So 2/5 times 2/5. If I did it right, things should cancel next to the variable. Yep, 2 cancels, 5 cancels. I'm left with just W on that side. And on the other side, 5 cancels. So these become 1s. That becomes a 1. That becomes a 3. So I'm left with 1/3. And I would check that to make sure it's my final answer. So let's just plug that back into. I'll plug it back into not the original, but where I did the improper fraction. So 5/2 times 1/3. That's the answer that I got. I'm checking. Should equal my original problem of 5/6. Well, this one's pretty easy. 5 times 1 is 5. 2 times 3 is 6. I'm left with 5/6. That one checks out. I feel confident about that answer right there. W equals 1/3. Okay, so no matter which side it's on, right? When you see a fraction, it's actually I know generally we kind of like shy away from fractions. We don't like fraction problems. In a lot of ways, it's easier because you could just say, okay, I know all I have to do is flip it over and let everything cancel out. Okay. So the keys again is right here. You just need to multiply by the reciprocal. And remember, the reciprocal is just the flip of the fraction. So instead of 5/2, we multiplied by 2/5. Same thing on letter C and B and A, all these same problems. Again, you want everything to cancel out that's next to the variable. And the way you do that is by, instead of dividing, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Okay. Now, one last thing I want to show you to make sure, to show you how these problems are a little bit different than what you learned in the last lesson. This problem is not a fraction problem. Okay. This is not the same. It's kind of like it's dividing, right? So some people think that is, oh, I'm just going to multiply by reciprocal, and it's kind of similar to that because it's kind of like dividing by 4 is the same as 1/4. But remember, this is what we did in your last lesson, where you would say, oh, I know what to do. I'm going to multiply by 4 here, right? Because this is dividing by 4. Well, you're really doing the same thing, multiply by 4 over 1. So when you see a fraction or a division problem, they're similar, but I wouldn't necessarily say reciprocal on this one. This one, I would just want those 4s to cancel out, and I would get x is equal to 40. Okay. So there's dividing and fractions are very closely related. And no matter what you're trying to cancel out, you're trying to say, okay, I want something that's on the bottom, so I need to make something at the top to get it to cancel out. So those are things you want to kind of look at with these fraction coefficients. And again, watch out for the negatives. Those are ones that are going to be really tricky. So it's always a good idea to know if your answer should be negative from the beginning or not. So for example, if I look at letter C and I see there's only one negative, I know my final answer is going to be negative. If only one side is negative, the answer is going to be negative. Um, Same thing here. I knew that I only had one negative right here and nothing negative on the other side. I knew that my final answer will be negative. Okay, so that's the key. That's another key. So again, multiply with the reciprocal. That's the big key for today, and hopefully that makes sense.